Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. So, where to start? Peter Geoghegan. On Tuesday evening, I think it was about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the evening, you rang me and you said, hey, do you want to come and watch money fall from the sky? I'm in Westminster right now. Do you want to come see? Why were you going to watch money falling from the sky?
Thank you very much, and hello, everybody. Yeah, it's lovely to be here, and yeah, it wasn't Theresa May's magic money tree I was looking for, actually. It was on Tuesday evening, and I was cycling around Westminster because I was working with a group of guys from an organisation called Led by Donkeys, which, if you know them, are a campaign group who make absolutely amazing videos. And I'd done an investigation, myself and my colleague Lucas, into what's called Tufton Street, which is think tanks, anonymously funded think tanks that are really influential on the right of British politics. They're the people who kind of dreamt up Liz Truss. And we'd done a big investigation into where all their money was coming from and how their money was going into the Conservative Party. And Led by Donkeys had decided we're going to turn this into a bit of a video. And part of that was going to be money raining down on Tufton Street in central London. So I found myself perched on the corner of this really fancy street, Tufton Street. It's just around the corner from Westminster. It's really, really plush. Looking like I was loitering with intent, frankly. I was worried the cops were going to be called on me at about 11 o'clock in the evening. And eventually this truck pulls up, and out of the back come out all these mainly men in hard hats from Led by Donkeys with ladders, which they started putting onto the side of 55 Tufton Street. And 55 Tufton Street is the home of literally dozens of think tanks, all with the same people involved, lots of big Conservative donors, lots of big money. And next thing, very quickly, they start to put down a tarpaulin on front of the top of 55 Tufton Street, and they start broadcasting this wonderful film. You can check it out on Instagram and on Twitter of money falling down the sky onto Tufton Street, voiced by none other than Carol Vorderman. And if you told me when I was a kid watching Countdown that Carol Vorderman would be narrating some of my investigations, I would have thought you were completely crazy. But that's the world we live in now. And it was really fascinating to watch this, to watch one of my stories, watch one of my investigations, kind of just take... be turned into amazing piece of campaign material and almost art. But I think what it flagged to me standing there was how much money flows through our politics. And we had tracked over £35 million had gone from the directors of these organisations. People like the Centre for Policy Studies, the Institute of Economic Affairs. These are organisations with kind of fancy names that sound like they're really august, but have for a long time been at the forefront of the Conservative Party, really. And we tracked over 35 million from these directors, trustees, to the Conservative Party. And what we were doing is basically showing their faces onto the front of Tufton Street and showing how much money had gone. And when you look at it, I think it's really compelling. It just gives you a real sense of how our politics, for a long time, has actually been run by quite small numbers of people with quite large amounts of money who are able to use their money to influence the political conversation and ultimately the policies that have come in especially over the last 5 to 10 years.
And so what's wrong with this? I mean, why was this a story? Why does this matter? Why shouldn't these organisations and these people be giving money to political parties?
I think that one of the reasons I got interested in looking at some of this stuff, like my last book was called Democracy for Sale, Dark Money and Dirty Politics. And so what's dark money? What does that mean? And it's a phrase that comes from the States, actually, from Jane Meyer, who's a wonderful journalist at The New Yorker. And she wrote a great book of the same title, Dark Money. And dark money, essentially, is any money that gets into the political system that you can't see. And why does that matter? It's actually because there's a reason why people want to put money into politics anonymously. It's far more effective if you don't know where the money comes from. And often you're doing it because you don't want that money to be public. And I got really interested in these think tanks because they don't declare their donors. They don't declare where their money came from. So when Liz Truss came to power in her short-lived interregnum, and before she was taken down by, was it trans activists and the deep state? Was that they were the people that got her? whatever it was she was telling Steve Bannon when she caught up with him recently on television. But when she came to power, all the people pretty much behind her were from these think tanks. Her head of economic policy used to be the head of the Taxpayers Alliance. Again, doesn't declare its funding. The Institute of Economic Affairs proudly talked about how they'd incubated her and were incredibly happy with her policies, as were the Centre for Policy Studies and others. And what I was so interested in was these people don't declare their donors, yet they're able to have so much influence on our politics. And dark money effectively is about any of those things that happen. And actually, we can see it in action now in general. We have a general election going on. A few months ago, we changed our laws, but nobody really noticed it in Britain around our elections, and they've made it much easier to give anonymously to political parties. The Conservative Party massively increased, they increased by over 40% the amount you can give anonymously. So you can give more money anonymously into politics, which again gives more opportunities for people to shape the political agenda in ways that you can't see. And I must say, when I started working on this stuff about 5 or 6 years ago, I was often like, yeah, this stuff, I do think it's really important, but obviously lots of other factors influence our politics, which they do. But Liz Truss and what's happened since, and actually the Brexit referendum too, actually makes me increasingly aware that this sort of thing does really matter. And small amounts of money. When I was writing my book, I spoke to a guy called Gutto Bebb, who used to be a Tory minister, the Welsh minister. And he told me on the record, he said, if I wanted to influence British politics, I would never give money to a political party. I would give it to a think tank.
And so what you discovered was that all the people that had bankrolled Liz Truss and her disastrous mini budget, which crashed the currency, hiked up our interest rates and mortgage rates, created obscene amounts of damage really, really fast. Now they're bankrolling Rishi Sunak.
Yes, effectively, which is hilarious, because Rishi Sunak loves saying how wrong Liz Truss was, but it's the same small group of people. So to take one example, there's a guy called Graham Edwards who's on the board of the Centre for Policy Studies. The Centre for Policy Studies was set up by Keith Joseph, who was kind of the architect of Margaret Thatcher back in the 70s. Immortalised in a song by John Cooper Clarke, in a poem by John Cooper Clarke called Beasley Street. One of the lines is a baby dies and Keith Joseph smiles on a box on Beasley Street. And so he's very much on the right of the Conservative Party. Similarly with the Institute of Economic Affairs. But when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, he appointed Graham Edwards as his fundraiser. Graham Edwards had given £50,000 to Liz Truss, had publicly endorsed her, and since has given over £4 million to Rishi Sunak and raised about £50 million for the Tories. These are the same people, Anthony Bamford, these are the same small groups of people, lots of whom, surprise, surprise, are also members of the House of Lords, who've been given peerages for quote-unquote services to the Conservative Party, which is totally and utterly mad. Like, I'm not a British national. I'm not a British citizen, I'm proud to say. I've lived here for a long time, though. But I can't get over it. This country gives people seats in a legislature for life. I do, for my sins, occasionally go into the House of Lords to meet contacts. There's some very, very old people there. Like, some of these people are going to be lords and baronesses for ages, and they give them to political donors.
So how much does it cost? How much does a seat in the House of Lords cost? You worked this out, I remember, in a previous investigation.
I did a big investigation with this in the Sunday Times years ago. It was basically £3 million is the going rate.
3 million quid, anyone, right? Just 3 million quid. It's quite cheap.
Well, do you not want to be a lord or a lady, you know? If you've been to the House of Lords, there's a strong vibe of social care going on there somewhere.
So where can people read about all this? Where are you publishing?
So that's another interesting thing. So I used to run, as you did too, openDemocracy, and I work at the moment for a thing called the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, but the main thing I do is publish on Substack. Substack is a platform some of you guys might know. I run a Substack called Democracy for Sale. It started off just as me. It's grown a lot, actually. There's me and my colleague Lucas, who it's not a full-time job, but we published there.
Two-man band.
A two-man band. But we also publish other people, like Led by Donkeys. The story this week went with The Mirror. We work with mainstream partners. We also do a lot of work with new media organisations. And I'm finding that more and more interesting is the ability to get these stories out in new forms. So the video we did with Led by Donkeys, it was watched more than 1.5 million times on Twitter. You know, I've done stories that were on the front page of the Sunday Times that 1.5 million people did not see that. And I think that's really interesting for me as a journalist, to try to think about the other ways in which people can consume. Whether it's coming here and talking to people like you, like there's new ways for people to consume stories.
So basically everyone should sign up to your email. It's a newsletter, isn't it?
It's a newsletter. It goes out whenever I've got a story. So it probably goes out 2 or 3 times a week. It'll go out more in between now and the election, and I think there'll be a lot more
Democracy
coming.
for scale, everyone. You want to sign up now to get the scoops. But does it pay the bills?
Interestingly, it's not. It's a fascinating model in that how it works is people sign up as subscribers. You can be free. So I really want to keep this material free, so it's free for everybody. But I do ask people to pay. Increasingly, people are paying because I think people see the stories and there's stories that they want to support. And we, again, working with other partners to help do that. But in time, I'd love to build it into a thing that was running on its own steam and able to be sustaining and sufficient.
So you can sign up for free, you can get the emails for free, and if you think it's really good, then you're asked to.
There you're asked. I'll ask you.
To make a
give the hard
contribution.
sell. I will come round to your house and go give us some money. But journalism costs. It costs journalism. It costs money to do good work. But what's fascinating, I think, now is you have the opportunity to dedicate yourself. So my work is just all about money and power and influence in Britain. Whether it's, and a lot of my work for the last while has been looking at the Conservative government, of course. Mm-hmm. We're probably going to have a Labour administration soon. There's a lot of stuff to look at there. There's a lot. You can see, if you look at the influence of lobbyists on the Labour Party, if you look at, we're going to have a government in which Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson and others who have big lobbying interests are going to be very influential. There's a lot of things. And our politics, fundamentally, how our political system works, which is run by money, is broken. So if you look at it, we just know, the headline of this talk is, how to pay for an election, how much, how you run an election, and we just had the first donation figures out last week. And it's really interesting. The Conservative Party, in the first week of the 2019 election, the one that Boris Johnson won, they raised £5.7 million. In the first week of this election, Rishi Sunak's Conservatives raised £575,000.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it's almost as if even they can't get money. And if you want to know why they were so reluctant to give Frank Hester back his money, have a look at the data from the Electoral Commission. If they gave Frank Hester back his money, they wouldn't have any money.
Right.
But the problem with this is, in one way that's great, you can say people are moving, and the Labour Party raised about £1 million, but we have a politics that runs on private money. And with that comes expectations. Actually, I got really, one of the things that's most interesting about what I do now compared to what I did before, is that running things like the Substack, people have a direct relationship with you. You can just press, please don't all do this, but if you can just press reply to one of those emails, and I get it. I will get it. And somebody got in touch with me the other day who had been involved with the Labour Party back 15 years ago, had been a Labour fundraiser. And he sent me this, he'd written a letter to The Guardian back in the day. It was really interesting. It was to do with the hunting ban. And basically, Labour, he'd gone to this guy, and this guy had written a cheque for £1 million and said, "I want you to. This is to ban hunting." And he kind of got this guy.
Oh, so that's why.
Yeah, this is indeed.
This was such a huge political football. Someone just said, "Right, this is going to be.
This is what I want.
£1 million, please."
And you might think that's a perfectly reasonable policy and something we should be doing, but there is a real problem where people can buy access. And the problem that we've got is we've now got a system in the UK where the COVID contracts. I did a lot of work on COVID contracts back especially at the start of the pandemic. I was probably one of the first journalists to start looking at contracts and starting to go, these are going to lots of political donors or political connections.
VIP lane, as we discovered later.
Yes, the VIP lane for PPE contracts. You were 10 times more likely to get a contract if you knew a government minister. But what we can see for that is that that money bought access. And with that access, you can make huge amounts of money. And unfortunately, you can now start to see how that has been the case for a very long time. And yes, Labour are now out raising money from the Tories, are bringing way more private money too. But with that comes expectations. And the problem in this country is that the system that we have for how we run our politics and how money influences our politics, and it's taken a huge change in the last few years too. There's way more money now in our politics than there ever was before. When I first started doing this work like 5-6 years ago, £50,000 was a big donation. It got you, this is so crazy. Have you ever heard of the Leaders Group? No, none of you are in the Leaders Group then. So for £50,000, if you give the Conservative Party £50,000, you become a member of a thing called the Leaders Group of Conservative donors. That means once every quarter, so once every 3 months, you get to have a private dinner with other leaders group members and the Prime Minister and a bunch of cabinet ministers, all off the record, all on background, no notes taken, which is kind of amazing for 50 grand. You know, look around here.
It's a lot of money, but it's also very cheap.
Exactly, it's a lot. Yeah.
If you think about like access and democracy, like democratic integrity. Yeah.
There's people who are paying that to send one of their school children to secondary school. And what's fascinating now, if I look at those, we've now seen the rise of these huge donors, like Frank Hester, who gave 15 million. These are huge amounts of money. Compared to America, they're not, but I often think that misunderstands how the money works in Britain, because there's so few people here. I'd be surprised if many people in this room have ever made a political donation. So what that means is, because our politics runs on private money, it's a small number of people that all the different political parties are chasing and are making, frankly, effectively pledges to these people in exchange for money. Those pledges might be seats in the House of Lords, they might be,
policy.
They might be policy changes as well, exactly.
What's that Roberto Saviano quote?
Roberto Saviano, the guy who did Gomorrah, the mafia journalist of the mafia, said that Britain was the most corrupt place in the world.
This is a guy who spent his life investigating the mafia. So.
And what he was partly talking about there as well wasn't just our political system, but it was also the architecture of the City of London, the secrecy of our corporate vehicles, the way we have in Britain is the center of an entire offshore network, which allows tax avoidance on an unbelievable industrial scale. It's probably the biggest single issue in the world, actually, is the way in which huge amounts of wealth. And our politics, what I can never get over is how our politicians don't understand that our politics are now a product of that. These systems of taxation have created a world in which, and these systems of secrecy, in which the very rich are able to pay almost no tax. And so much of the problems we have in our politics are people can see that there's two systems going on. They're not wrong. Most people have to pay income tax at 40%, or whatever it is. If you earn over £50,000, it's 40%. If you are very rich, you can avoid paying almost any tax at all. And a lot of the problems that we have in the sense of burning injustice on both sides of the political spectrum comes from this. But yet there's almost no push to do anything about it.
So what else should we be looking out for this election? What are you noticing that, and what should we be keeping our eyes and ears open for? So you've talked a lot about money. You've talked a lot about who's giving money to political parties. What are they getting in return? What else should we be paying attention to?
I'm always looking at what's going on online. Online is always a fascinating space, like what's happening in terms of political advertisement, who's sending messages out there. Our online ad space is kind of almost completely unregulated. Most of our politics is almost completely unregulated. It's so crazy in this country.
So, for example, what was the ad in the 2016 Brexit referendum about? Was it about Turkey? I can't remember.
There was a bunch of big ads. So the Brexit referendum was the first big online campaign. Yeah. And in the last 3 or 4 days, the Leave campaign spent about £7 million online, quite a lot of which was subsequently found to have been illegally spent. And they pushed a bunch of messages around Turkey joined the European Union, Syrian refugees, of course, the 350 million on the side of the bus, all that stuff. What was so interesting about it, and you're starting to see a bit of it online already as well, is different narratives. People will push different narratives online than they might do, especially on the side of a bus, because you're able to both target people better, but also just push harder narratives. So you can start to see some of that. So online is a huge space where I think we're going to see a lot.
You can just get away with lying.
Oh yeah, you can say whatever you want.
And no one notices. I mean, it's harder to notice. It's not necessarily covered in the mainstream media. And then you can also give money to groups who aren't political parties who will lie for you online, right? You
can do all sorts of things. Yeah, you can basically you can give money to third parties who will campaign on your behalf. It's such a crazy system. So you could be sitting in Moscow. You could set up a British shell company online, which you can do in about half an hour, costs about £20. You could then use that shell company. At that point, it doesn't have to be. Normally, it's supposed to be doing business, but no one ever looks at it. And you can make political donations based through that shell company. Because under British electoral law, companies that are registered in Britain can donate no matter who owns them.
So the money can come from anywhere?
Come from anywhere. No one checks it.
You can pay in rubles.
Under British electoral law, it's not clear if the proceeds of crime are impermissible as a donation. So you could, in theory, give money so you could go and do a bank job, and the bank job itself is illegal. You're not allowed to hold up banks, just so you know. But if you decide to give the money you've got from holding up the bank to a political party, the political party wouldn't have to give it back.
Yeah, as long as you have a British postcode.
Yeah, in that instance, yeah, you could route it through it. But even if you didn't, you could route it through you could set up a company from your prison cell on your phone.
Cost 20 quid.
Yeah, of course, it's really easy to do.
We're giving people lots of great ideas here.
The maddest thing is, though, actually, Companies House might come down on you if you do it as a joke. So a guy did this. He said he set up a company as, he called him, I could be wrong, maybe he called himself Nick Clegg. It was during the coalition years. A guy went online. He called himself Nick Clegg? Yeah, he called himself, he said he was doing it, I'm doing this. Right. And he then got done by Companies House for impersonation. Even though he was like, I'm doing this, and they never, like, there's almost no kind of censure of actual companies who are doing fraudulent activity.
Okay, so my next question was going to be, so, what's coming up next? So you're basically going to set up a bunch of shell companies
and do some
root
bank
money
jobs
for them, rob some banks. No, what are you? So you're going to be covering the election, and then what happens next for Democracy for Sale?
Yeah, I'll be doing much more work around the election, around some of these issues. I think around election integrity, but I think fundamentally we have a really broken political system in this country. The way access works, the way lobbyists are able to walk straight, the revolving door between the lobbying world, the business world, and the political world is just a humongous problem. It's not going to go away. Our election laws are an absolute joke, as I described. We have a system in which we don't even have an independent electoral regulator anymore. We have a system in which political donors can buy seats in the House of Lords. All of these things. The craziest bit of all this is it's really easy to actually solve a lot of this stuff. We know how to do it. There's lots of things. It's sitting there and able to be brought in. Yeah. So
and what's Labour promised to do? Is it promised to
Very, very, very little on this. So Labour were really,
I guess it's kind of inconvenient once you come to power, isn't it? You don't want to change anything.
This is it. People always think that the broken system works for them. This is the huge fun. It's a fallacy. They're wrong. But everyone thinks that once we've won power, we understand how this broken system works. So the hilarious thing at the moment that's happening is with the Tories. The Tories massively jacked up the amount of spending that you can do during a general election. They did this when they brought these new laws in November. They increased the spending limits for general elections during the campaign. But what they also effectively did was get rid of the laws around constituency and national spending. This sounds a bit geeky and sad, but basically, until recently, you could only spend very small amounts of money in a seat for the general election, and you could have overarching campaigning. But there was actually a court case about 10 years ago in Clacton where Nigel Farage is running again, where the Tories basically spent a lot of their national campaign money there to try and stop Farage. That's gone now. So basically you can spend as much money as you want. The problem is the Conservatives actually have done this. It doesn't help them at all now. It's actually disastrous for them because Labour or the Tories or Labour or the Lib Dems or even Reform can now pour money into individual seats. So we have this system now that actually massively big money is now more and more embedded into the system.
All right, so what do we do? What you said it's easy. What if there was a government that actually wanted to clean up our politics, what would they do?
Okay, I won't get into the boring minutiae of it, but there's a load of stuff. A cap on political donations, most people think is a good idea. It's not hard done. You could actually have proper we have almost no lobbying laws in this country. We have a lobbying register that David Cameron brought in that was so weak.
David Cameron?
Well, exactly. Remember
who became a lobbyist himself.
But he didn't actually have to register as a lobbyist because his lobbying laws were that weak that if you were an in-house lobbyist, you don't have to register. So there's all sorts of stuff, and actually it's people much smarter than me put it together. There's lots of people, Spotlight on Corruption, put together a really good kind of platform that all the political parties, they want them to sign up for, not many of them have. It includes quite easy things that we could do to bring in more transparency and strip money out of politics. And fundamentally, why does it matter? It matters because it builds trust in our politics. We have never had less trust in our politics than we have now. And one of the reasons for that is stories like Michelle Mone and Doug Barrowman. It's stories like political donors getting access and favours. These all really matter because ordinary people go, hang on, I'm just struggling to get by. I'm living in an environment where we've had no growth, where my public services have gone to hell.
Energy bills
have gone through the roof. But yet, if I have enough money to give it to a political party, I can get whatever I want.
And as we see, I mean, this is part of the work I do. When people get angry and when trust in politics and democratic institutions declines, you can end up in some really scary places. There's another election happening just over the English Channel, and do you think that actually, where does the Conservative Party go next? Is it going to become more right-wing? Are we going to see some of what's happening in Europe happen here?
Well, I've got a story coming out in a couple of days about the influence of the US right on the conservative right in Britain and some of these groups I've been talking about today. And I think that's a genuinely big concern. I know from talking to some of my sources that people from the big American think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, who are really influential, the Heritage Foundation are described as Trump's think tank. They're very close to the Trumpy wing of the American, the GOP. The links between those, especially if Trump gets into power, are going to become bigger and bigger. If you look at Liz Truss's absolutely hilariously named Popular Conservatives, she now spends most of her days, the popcons, she now spends a lot of her time in the States, giving interviews to the likes of Steve Bannon, and actually, as I've written about before, being paid by the likes of the Heritage Foundation to go around Europe giving speeches. So those relationships between the British right and the American right, unfortunately, I think if anything, especially out of power, could become bigger. And I think that's going to be the big unknown of the next few years here.
So we're going to be sandwiched between potentially far-right American government and far-right many European governments.
Yeah, its sun is shining outside though, it's not a bad day.
So once again, do sign up for Democracy for Sale, Substack, if you want to hear more of the stories that Peter's just given you a sneak preview of.